In a threatened valley, a girl frees a trapped dog, igniting a thrilling battle to save their sacred river from greed. Welcome to Pause Verve. Subscribe and share videos with those who need love. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the towering evergreens of Willow Creek Valley, painting the mist that hung over the river in shades of gold and rose. The valley, nestled in the heart of the Pacific Northwest, was a patchwork of dense forests, rolling meadows, and a crystalline river that wound like a silver thread through the small community. At the edge of this river stood the Rainwater Homestead, a modest log cabin built by Ella Rainwater's great-grandparents, its weathered cedar walls and slanted roof a testament to generations of resilience. The 10-acre plot, bordered by wild blackberry bushes and ancient Douglas firs, was more than a home. It was a sanctuary, its riverbank holding the last pure water source in a valley increasingly scarred by the rumble of logging trucks. Ella Rainwater, 9 years old and small for her age, stood barefoot on the cabin's wide porch, her deep brown eyes scanning the river as it sparkled in the dawn light. Her long black hair, tied in a single braid with a strip of woven cedar bark, swayed as she tilted her head, listening to the soft rush of water and the chatter of chickadees in the trees. There was a quiet wisdom in her gaze, a stillness that belied her youth, honed by the absence of her parents and the teachings of her grandfather, Thomas. Since her parents vanished 3 years ago during a protest against clear-cut industries, the logging company that had begun stripping the hills above the valley, Ella had grown more observant, as if searching for clues to their disappearance in the patterns of the world around her. Inside the cabin, the scent of sage and cedar smoke lingered from Thomas's morning prayers. Thomas Rainwater, at 70, moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had spent his life in harmony with the land. His silver hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and his hands, roughened by decades of tending gardens and crafting herbal remedies, were still nimble as he crushed dried yarrow leaves into a mortar. A respected Coast Salish elder, Thomas, was the valley's last traditional herbalist, his knowledge of plants and healing sought by those who trusted the old ways over the town's overworked clinic. He had raised Ella's mother, Marina, alone after her mother's passing, and now he raised Ella, teaching her the Salish stories, songs, and the sacred duty to protect their land. "Ella, little one," Thomas called from the kitchen, his voice warm but firm. "The river's waiting. Check the nets before breakfast." Ella nodded, slipping on her worn sneakers and grabbing a woven basket from the porch. The morning chores were a ritual, a rhythm that tethered her to the land. She made her way down the grassy path to the river, where the water ran so clear she could see the pebbles on its bed, smoothed by centuries of flow. The Rainwater's river was a lifeline for Willow Creek Valley. Since clear-cuts logging had muddied other streams and tainted wells with runoff, families from town drove miles to fill jugs from the Rainwater spring, a gift Thomas freely shared despite the growing pressure to sell their land. Ella knelt by the riverbank, her fingers deftly checking the small fish traps Thomas had woven from willow branches. The traps were empty today, a sign the fish were scarcer than they'd been last summer. She frowned, remembering Thomas's stories of rivers once so thick with salmon you could walk across their backs. "The land gives and we give back," he'd say, teaching her to thank each plant and animal for its contribution. She whispered a quiet thanks to the river anyway, her breath forming a faint cloud in the cool morning air. As she stood, a rustle in the blackberry bushes caught her attention. She froze, her heart quickening. The valley was home to all sorts of creatures, deer, raccoons, even the occasional black bear. But this sound was different, softer, almost deliberate. Ella's eyes darted to the thicket, where a flash of golden fur moved between the thorns. A dog, she thought, but not one of the town's pets. The stray dogs that roamed the hills were a topic of hushed talk in Willow Creek, a pack led by a large Labrador retriever the townsfolk called the Ghost for his elusive presence. Thomas had warned her to steer clear. They were wild, unpredictable, surviving on instinct in a valley growing harsher by the day. Yet, as Ella watched, the rustle stopped and the forest fell silent again. She shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination. The valley could play tricks, Thomas always said, especially on those who weren't listening closely. She turned back to the cabin, the basket swinging lightly in her hand. But a seed of curiosity had taken root. There was something about that glimpse of fur, something that felt like a call she couldn't yet name. Back at the cabin, Thomas was setting out a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with wild honey, his eyes crinkling as Ella recounted her morning. "No fish today, grandfather," she said, settling at the table. "But I heard something by the river. Maybe a dog." Thomas's hands paused over the clay mugs he was filling with nettle tea. "Dogs in these hills are wild, Ella. They've got their own paths, same as us. Respect them, but don't seek them out." His tone was gentle, but carried the weight of experience. Ella nodded, though her thoughts lingered on the golden fur and the rustle in the bushes. She felt a pull, a sense that the valley was whispering something only she could hear. As they ate, the distant rumble of a logging truck echoed through the valley, a reminder of the world pressing in on their sanctuary. Clear-cut Industries had been a shadow over Willow Creek for years, its operations stripping the hills and muddying the waters. The rainwater land, with its clean river, was a prize the company coveted, and whispers in town suggested they'd do anything to claim it. But for now the cabin stood firm, its hearth glowing with warmth, its walls filled with the echoes of Salish songs. Ella and Thomas were guardians of something precious, and in the quiet of their morning, that duty felt like enough. The ordinary world of Willow Creek Valley was a fragile balance of beauty and threat, of tradition and change. For Ella, it was a world of river songs and grandfather's stories, but also of absences, of parents lost, of a valley under siege. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the homestead, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift, that the rustle in the bushes was the first note of a story waiting to unfold. The afternoon sun hung low over Willow Creek Valley, casting a warm golden glow across the Rainwater homestead. Ella Rainwater, her braids swinging as she moved, was tasked with checking the riverbank for debris, a chore that had become more frequent since Clear-Cut Industries logging sent mud and branches downstream. The river, still clear where it bubbled from the spring on their land, was the heart of the valley, and Ella felt a quiet pride in helping her grandfather, Thomas, keep it clean. She carried a burlap sack for collecting stray twigs and plastic scraps, her sneakers sinking slightly into the soft earth as she followed the familiar path to the water's edge. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp moss, and the river sang its gentle song, a melody Ella had known since she could walk. She hummed a Salish lullaby under her breath, one her mother used to sing, the notes weaving into the rustle of leaves overhead. As she bent to pluck a tangled fishing line from the shallows, a faint sound stopped her, a low-pained whimper barely audible over the water's flow. Ella straightened, her heart skipping a beat. The sound came again, sharper now, from a dense thicket of blackberry bushes just beyond the riverbank, where thorns guarded the shadows. "Thomas," she called softly, though she knew her grandfather was back at the cabin tending his herb garden. No answer came, only the whimper, tugging at something deep in her chest. Ella hesitated, remembering Tomas's warning about the stray dogs that roamed the hills. "They're wild things, Ella, with wild hearts," he'd said, his eyes serious. "Best to leave them be." But the sound was so desperate, so full of need, that Ella couldn't turn away. She set her sack down and stepped toward the thicket, her small hands pushing aside thorny branches as she peered into the gloom. There, half hidden by the tangle of vines, was a dog, a large Labrador retriever, his golden coat matted with mud and blood. He lay on his side, one front leg caught in the cruel jaws of a steel trap, the metal glinting dully in the filtered light. His shoulder was torn where he'd struggled, and his brown eyes, soulful and wide, locked onto Ella's with a mix of fear and defiance. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This was no ordinary stray. She recognized him from the stories whispered in town. This was the dog they called the Ghost, the leader of the valley's pack, elusive and untamed. "Don't be scared," Ella whispered, crouching low to seem less threatening, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. The dog growled, a low rumble that showed white teeth, but it was weak, more warning than threat. Ella stayed still, her grandfather's teachings echoing in her mind. Patience is the first medicine. She studied the trap, its springs taut, and the dog's labored breathing. He was exhausted, his strength fading with each moment the metal bit deeper. Ella's eyes stung with tears, not from fear but from the injustice of it. How could someone set such a cruel thing so close to their river? She thought of the stories Thomas told, of animals as kin, guardians of the land who deserved respect. This dog, with his proud gaze and scarred fur, was no different. "I'm going to help you," she said, her voice firm with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She reached for her canteen, clipped to her belt and unscrewed the cap, the cool water inside sloshing softly. Moving slowly, Ella inched closer, stopping when the dog's growl deepened. She sat cross-legged on the ground, just out of reach, and poured a small pool of water into the dirt, pushing it toward him with a stick. "Though you're thirsty, aren't you?" she said, her tone soft, like she was coaxing a skittish colt. The dog's nostrils flared, catching the scent of the water. Thirst won over caution, and he stretched his neck, lapping at the offering with desperate, grateful gulps. Ella's heart swelled. She'd reached him, even if just a little. She spoke to him as she refilled the canteen from the river, her words a gentle stream of comfort. "My name's Ella. I live here with my grandfather. He says the river's special, that it's been clean forever because the land loves us back." The dog's growls faded, replaced by pained pants as he lay his head down, too tired to fight. Ella saw her chance. She crept back to the thicket, studying the trap's mechanism. Thomas had once shown her how such traps worked, explaining the springs that needed pressing to release the jaws. It would take all her strength, but she wasn't leaving him to suffer. "I'm going to get you out," she told him, her small hands trembling as she positioned them on the trap's springs. "It'll hurt, but then you'll be free." She counted aloud, steadying herself. 1, 2, 3. With a grunt, she pressed down, her arms straining against the metal. For a moment, nothing happened, and panic flared in her chest. Then, with a sharp snap, the trap sprang open. The dog yelped, lurching backward, nearly knocking Ella over as he scrambled free. Ella fell back, her breath ragged, watching as the dog stumbled, blood dripping from his wounded shoulder. He didn't run, though, not yet. He stood, shaking, his eyes fixed on her, as if weighing her against some ancient instinct. Ella held out her hand, palm up, the way Thomas taught her to approach wild creatures. "You're okay now," she whispered. "You can go." To her surprise, the dog limped forward, his nose brushing her fingers in the lightest touch, gone almost before she felt it. Then, with a final glance, he turned and melted into the forest, his golden fur blending with the shadows. Ella sat, there, her heart racing, the bloody trap lying open beside her. She felt changed, as if the valley itself had spoken through those soulful brown eyes, marking the start of something bigger than she could yet understand. As she gathered her sack, and the trap to show Thomas, the river seemed to shimmer brighter, its song a little louder. Ella knew she'd crossed a line, not just in freeing the dog, but in choosing to trust her heart over fear. The Labrador Retriever, the ghost of Willow Creek, was out there now, carrying her kindness with him. And somehow, she knew he'd be back. The twilight sky over Willow Creek Valley glowed a soft lavender, the last traces of daylight clinging to the jagged silhouettes of the evergreen hills. Ella Rainwater sat on the porch of the family cabin, her knees drawn up, the steel trap she'd found by the river resting beside her like a grim trophy. Its metal jaws, still stained with the blood of the Labrador Retriever she'd freed, glinted faintly in the fading light. Her heart was still racing from the encounter, her mind replaying the dog's soulful brown eyes and the fleeting touch of his nose against her hand. She'd named him Coda in her thoughts, a Salish word meaning friend, though she hadn't dared speak it aloud. The valley felt different now, alive with a purpose she couldn't yet name. Inside, Thomas was preparing supper, the clink of pottery bowls mingling with the crackle of the hearth fire. Ella had told him everything, how she'd found the dog, freed him from the trap and watched him vanish into the forest. Thomas had listened quietly, his weathered face unreadable, though his eyes held a flicker of something ancient, like recognition of a story older than them both. "For you did right by that creature, Ella," he'd said, his voice low. "But wild things don't forget, and neither should you. Be watchful now." His words, both praise and warning, had settled in her chest, heavy with meaning. Ella's gaze drifted to the river, its surface a mirror for the first stars. She was about to head inside when a low rustle came from the tree line beyond the garden. She froze, her breath catching. The sound wasn't the usual scurry of a raccoon or the snap of a deer's hoof. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like many feet moving in unison. She stood, her small frame taut, and squinted into the gathering dark. Shadows shifted. And then they emerged, dozens of dogs, their fur a patchwork of gold, black and grey, their eyes glinting like embers in the dusk. At their center stood Coda, his golden coat unmistakable, his wounded shoulder held gingerly as he limped forward. They formed, a perfect circle around the homestead, not advancing, not growling, just watching. Their breath rose in misty clouds, and the air hummed with a strange electricity, as if the valley itself held its breath. Ella's heart pounded, but not with fear. She felt a pull, a connection to these wild creatures who seemed to know her. Coda's eyes locked onto hers, steady and unblinking, and in that moment she understood. He hadn't come alone to thank her. He'd brought his pack, and they were here for a reason. "Grandfather," Ella called, her voice a hushed urgency. Thomas appeared at the door, a dish towel in his hands, his silver ponytail catching the light from the cabin. When he saw the circle of dogs, his hands stilled, and a low murmur escaped him, a Salish prayer Ella recognized from his healing rituals. "Great Spirit," he whispered, "the guardians gather again." He stepped onto the porch, his presence, calming Ella's racing pulse. The dogs shifted, their ears twitching at his voice, but none broke formation. "What do they want?" Ella asked, her eyes never leaving Coda. Tomas placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "They're not here to harm, little one. They're here because of you, because of what you did for their leader. Animals like these, they know the land's heart. They feel its pain same as we do." He gestured to the river, its flow a quiet song in the night. "This water, this land, it's sacred. They protect it, just as we do." Ella's mind raced. She thought of the trap, its cruel jaws set so close to their river, and the logging trucks that rumbled through the valley, leaving scars on the hills. Clear-cut industries had been circling their land for years, offering money Thomas always refused. The dogs, she realized, weren't just strays. They were part of the valley's balance, pushed to the edges by the same forces threatening her home. "They're here to help us, aren't they?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded, his eyes distant, as if seeing a memory from long ago. "When I was your age, my grandmother told me of a time when our people and the wild ones stood together to guard the rivers. That bond is rare now, but not gone. You've woken it, Ella." His words filled her with a mix of awe and responsibility. She looked at Coda, who sat now, his head high despite his injury, and felt a spark ignite within her. A call to act, to stand with these dogs and protect what mattered most. Before she could speak, the sound of an engine broke the silence, headlights, slicing through the dark as a sleek black truck roared up the dirt drive. The dogs tensed, a low growl rippling through the pack, but they held their ground. The truck stopped at the edge of the yard, and a man stepped out, his polished boots crunching on the gravel. Jasper Holt, once a son of the Salish community, now a clear-cut executive, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the valley's wildness. His eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the scene. The circle of dogs, Ella on the porch, Thomas standing protective beside her. "Thomas," Jasper called, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. "We need to talk about the offer. The company's prepared to double it. This land could secure Ella's future, schools, college, a life beyond this valley." His gaze flicked to the dogs, a flash of unease crossing his face. "And those animals, they're a danger. Town's already talking about culling them." Thomas's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "This land isn't for sale, Jasper. Not to you, not to Clearcut. And these dogs, they're on our land, under our protection." Ella felt a surge of pride at her grandfather's words, but also a spark of defiance. She stepped forward, her small frame silhouetted against the cabin's light. "They're not dangerous," she said, her voice clear and steady, surprising even herself. "They protect the river, same as us. You want our water for your company, But it belongs to the valley, to the dogs, to the people, to the land. Coda rose, limping, to stand beside her, his presence a silent vow. The pack shifted, forming a living barrier between the homestead and Jasper, their eyes glowing in the truck's headlights. Jasper's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Ella, you're young. You don't understand what's at stake." He turned to Thomas. "Think about her future, old man. I'll be back." He climbed into his truck, the engine roaring as he sped off, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Ella looked at Coda, then at the pack, their circle unbroken. She knew now what she had to do, not just for the river, but for the dogs, for her grandfather, for the valley itself. The call had come, and she was ready to answer. The morning after Jasper Holt's visit, Willow Creek Valley woke to a chorus of birdsong, the air crisp with the promise of a new day. Ella Rainwater stood at the edge of the homestead's garden, her hands still damp from watering the rows of sage and camas, bulbs she and her grandfather Thomas tended with care. The circle of dogs had vanished with the dawn, melting back into the forest as silently as they'd come. But Coda's presence lingered in Ella's mind, his steady gaze, the weight of his trust, the way he'd stood beside her against Jasper's threat. The steel trap, now hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin, was a grim reminder of the danger circling their land, like a hawk eyeing its prey. Inside, Thomas knelt by the hearth, feeding split cedar logs to the fire. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and the sharp tang of elderberry tincture he was brewing, a remedy for the valley's children who'd fallen ill from the polluted streams. At 70, Thomas carried the weight of his role as a Coast Salish elder with quiet dignity, his silver ponytail a stark contrast to his weathered brown skin. His eyes, deep-set and knowing, held stories of the land and its people, stories he'd passed to Ella since she was old enough to listen. Today, though, those eyes held a new intensity, as if he sensed the shift in the valley's rhythm that Ella felt in her bones. "Grandfather," Ella said, stepping inside and wiping her hands. On her overalls, "those dogs last night. They weren't just here for me, were they? They know something's wrong with the valley, don't they?" She clutched the woven cedar bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother, its smooth strands grounding her as she spoke. Thomas set down the pestle he was using and turned to her, his gaze steady. "Sit, little one," he said, gesturing to the woven mat by the fire. Ella obeyed, folding her legs beneath her, the warmth of the hearth easing the chill of the morning. Thomas settled across from her, his hands resting on his knees, palms up in the way he did when sharing something sacred. "You've opened a door, Ella, by helping that dog. Coda, you called him. The land's been waiting for someone to listen, and it chose you." Ella's breath caught. "Me? But I'm only 9. Her voice wavered, but her eyes were bright with curiosity, hungry for understanding. Thomas smiled, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Age doesn't matter to the land, it speaks to those who hear it. Long ago, our Salish ancestors walked with the wild ones, wolves, bears, dogs, as allies. They guarded the rivers, the forests, the places where the earth's heart beat strongest." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a reverent hush. "Your great-grandmother told of a time when a pack of dogs led our people to a hidden spring during a drought, saving the village. Those dogs weren't pets, Ella. They were kin, bound to us by respect, not chains." Ella's mind flashed to Coda, his golden fur and wounded shoulder, the way he'd led his pack to their homestead. "So Coda's like them? A guardian?" "More than that," Thomas said. "He's a bridge like you. The valley's hurting, clear-cuts machines tear its roots, poison its waters. The dogs feel it, same as we do. When you freed Coda, you showed him we're still worthy of trust. Now he's shown you to his pack. That's no small thing." He reached out, touching the cedar bracelet on her wrist. "Your mother wore this when she fought for the valley. She heard the land too. Now it's your turn." Ella's chest tightened at the mention of her mother, Marina, whose absence was a wound she carried quietly. She looked into Thomas's eyes, seeing not just her grandfather but a mentor, a keeper of wisdom who believed in her. "But what do I do, grandfather? Jasper wants our land, and those traps. Someone's hurting the dogs on purpose. How do I protect them and the river?" Thomas's expression softened, but his voice was firm. You start by listening, to the dogs, to the river, to your own heart. Coda's not your pet, Ella. He's wild, and you must respect that. But he's chosen you as an ally, so you honor him by being brave, by standing for what's right even when it's hard. He rose, moving to a carved wooden box on the mantel, and returned with a small pouch of dried cedar and sage. "Keep this with you," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It'll remind you of the old ways, of the strength in you and the land." Ella clutched the pouch, its earthy scent filling her senses. She felt a fire kindling within her, a resolve to protect Coda, the pack, and the river that was her family's legacy. Thomas's words were a map, guiding her toward a role she was only beginning to understand. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a guardian, chosen by the valley and its wild kin. As she stood, a distant bark echoed from the forest, sharp and urgent. Ella's head snapped toward the sound, her pulse quickening. Thomas met her gaze, his eyes glinting with quiet pride. "Go," he said. "The land's calling, but go with care and come back to me." Ella nodded, slipping the pouch into her pocket and stepping onto the porch. The valley stretched before her, its beauty laced with threat, its secrets whispering in the wind. Coda was out there, and with Thomas's wisdom as her guide, she was ready to answer the call, to forge a bond with the wild that would shape the future of Willow Creek. The midday sun filtered through the canopy of Willow Creek Valley, dappling the forest floor with patches of light as Ella Rainwater ventured beyond the homestead's familiar boundaries. The bark she'd heard from the porch still echoed in her mind, sharp and insistent, pulling her toward the tree line where Coda and his pack had vanished at dawn. The pouch of cedar and sage Thomas had given her was tucked in her pocket, its weight a quiet reassurance as she stepped into the wild heart of the valley. Her sneakers crunched on pine needles, and her braids swung with each determined step. At 9, Ella was crossing a threshold, leaving the safety of her ordinary world to answer the call of the land and its guardians. The forest was alive with sound, squirrels chattering, a distant woodpecker's rhythmic tap, the ever-present murmur of the river. Ella's eyes scanned the underbrush, searching for signs of Coda. Thomas's words rang in her ears. "Coda's chosen you as an ally. Honor him by being brave." She clutched the memory of the Labrador Retriever's soulful gaze, the way he'd stood beside her against Jasper Holt's intrusion. The valley was under threat. Clear-cut industries logging scarred the hills, and the traps set for the dogs were a sinister warning. Ella knew she couldn't stay on the porch anymore. She had to act, to protect the river and the pack that called her kin. As she pushed deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler, the trees denser. She followed a faint game trail, her small hands brushing aside ferns, when a low rustle stopped her cold. From the shadows emerged Coda, his golden fur catching the sunlight, his wounded shoulder still held gingerly. Behind him, 3 other dogs, lean, with coats of grey and black, watched her with wary eyes. Ella's breath hitched, but she held her ground, palms open at her sides as Thomas had taught her. "It's me," she whispered. "I'm here to help." Coda's ears twitched and he limped forward, his brown eyes searching hers. He let out a soft huff, not a growl, but a greeting, and the other dogs relaxed, their tails giving cautious flicks. Ella's heart swelled. Coda remembered her, trusted her. She knelt, offering a strip of dried salmon from her pocket, a gift she'd brought on instinct. Coda took it gently, his teeth careful not to graze her fingers, and shared it with the pack. In that moment, Ella felt a bond solidify, a pact between human and wild that marked her entry into a new world. The peace was shattered by the roar of an engine. Ella's head snapped toward the sound, her pulse racing as a black truck crested the ridge above the homestead, its clear-cut industries logo gleaming on the door. Jasper Holt stepped out, flanked by 2 men in crisp suits, their voices carrying faintly words like acquisition and final offer. Coda growled low and deep, and the pack shifted, forming a loose arc behind Ella. She stood, her small frame trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. This was no coincidence. Jasper was pressing harder, and the dogs knew it. "Ella!" Thomas's voice called from the direction of the cabin, urgent but steady. She turned to see him striding through the trees, his silver ponytail glinting. A woven basket slung over his shoulder. He reached her side, his eyes flicking to Coda and the pack before settling on the truck. "Stay close," he murmured, his hand resting on her shoulder. Together they moved back toward the homestead, the dogs trailing like silent sentinels. Jasper met them at the edge of the yard, his smile practiced but strained. "Thomas, Ella," he said, nodding. "I've brought colleagues to discuss the offer. 3 times the previous amount. Enough to give Ella a real future. Schools, opportunities, a life beyond this rustic existence." His eyes lingered on the dogs, now fanning out along the tree line, their presence a quiet threat. "And those strays. They're scaring folks in town. We're prepared to handle them for everyone's safety." Thomas's face was stone, but his voice carried the weight of generations. "Our land isn't for sale, Jasper. This river's been Salish since before your company's name was written on paper. As for the dogs, they're welcome here, unlike your traps." He gestured to the forest where Ella had found Coda's prison. Jasper's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Ella stepped forward, her voice clear despite the knot in her stomach. "Coda and his pack aren't hurting anyone. They drink from our river because it's clean, because your company's made everything else dirty." She pointed to the ridge, where Clearcut's machines had left barren slopes. "You want our water to hide what you've done, but we won't let you. The dogs won't let you." Coda moved to her side, his growl a low rumble, and the pack echoed it, their eyes fixed on Jasper and his men. The suits exchanged nervous glances, their hands twitching toward their phones. Jasper raised a hand, his voice smooth but tight. "You're a brave girl, Ella, but you're in over your head. This valley's changing, and you can't stop progress." He turned to Thomas. "Think about her, Thomas. I'll give you one more chance." He climbed back into the truck, the engine roaring as it sped off, leaving a cloud of dust. Ella's knees shook, but she stood tall, Coda's warmth against her leg grounding her. Thomas squeezed her shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "You spoke truth, little one, that's where it starts." He looked at the dogs, now settling into the grass, their vigilance unbroken. "They've chosen you and you've chosen them. There's no going back now." Ella nodded, her heart a mix of fear and fire. She'd crossed a line, not just into the forest, but into a fight bigger than herself. For the river, for Coda, for the valley's soul. The homestead, once her safe haven, was now a battleground, and she was ready to stand with her allies, human and wild, to protect it. The days following Jasper Holt's visit were a blur of tension and purpose in Willow Creek Valley. The air carried a faint tang of diesel from Clearcut Industries' machines, their distant rumble a constant reminder of the threat looming over the Rainwater homestead. Ella Rainwater, now tethered to the wild pulse of the valley, woke each morning with Coda's image in her mind, the golden Labrador retriever who'd become her ally, his pack a silent army guarding the river. At 9, Ella was learning the weight of courage, her small hands busy with chores but her heart set on protecting the land and its wild kin. The steel trap she'd hidden under the cabin floorboard was a secret she carried like a stone, its presence proof of a danger she couldn't ignore. Ella's first test came at the river, where she helped Thomas repair a fish trap damaged by debris from upstream logging. The water, still clear at their spring, grew murky farther down, a sign of Clearcut's reach. As she wove willow strands under Thomas's watchful eye, a young woman approached, her backpack bristling with scientific gear. Dr. Leela Chen, an environmental scientist from the State University, introduced herself with a warm smile. "I'm testing water quality in the valley," she said, her dark eyes scanning the river. "Your spring's the only clean source left. Mind if I take samples?" Thomas nodded, and Ella, curious, watched Lila work, her tools clicking as she measured pH and sediment. "The river's sick because of the concurrently logging," Ella said, her voice steady. "It's hurting the fish, the dogs, everything." Lila's gaze softened, impressed by the girl's insight. "You're right, Ella. My data shows heavy silt and chemicals downstream, but your aquifer's protected by bedrock. It's special, scientifically and culturally." She handed Ella a small notebook. "Want to help record the numbers?" "You've got a sharp eye," Ella beamed, scribbling Lila's measurements, feeling a spark of pride. Lila became her first ally, a bridge between Salish wisdom and modern science. They spent hours together, Lila teaching Ella about ecosystems while Ella shared stories of the valley's spirits. "The dogs know the river's clean," Ella said, pointing to where Coda's pack often drank at dusk. "They're guarding it like my grandfather and me." Lila nodded, her respect for Ella's bond with the dogs cementing their partnership. But enemies were gathering. In town, Jasper Holt's influence spread like wildfire. At the general store, Ella overheard whispers, farmers blaming Coda's pack for missing chickens, parents warning children to stay indoors. Jasper had been meeting with the town council, painting the dogs as a menace. "Those strays are a threat," he'd said at a public meeting, his voice smooth as polished wood. "We need to protect our community, and the rainwater land could fund that protection." His words swayed those reliant on logging jobs, splitting the valley between fear and greed. Ella faced her second test at school, where classmates taunted her. "Oh, your dogs are going to get shot," a boy sneered, echoing his father's talk of a cull. Ella's cheeks burned, but she held her chin high. "They're not my dogs, they're the valley's, and they're not hurting anyone." Her words earned glares, but also nods from a few, like Sarah, a quiet girl whose family drew water from the rainwater spring. Sarah became a tentative ally, slipping Ella notes about town gossip, including rumors of more traps in the hills. The hardest test came when Ella found another trap, this one near the homestead's boundary, its metal jaws marked with clear-cuts logo. Her stomach churned. She knew Jasper was behind it, targeting Coda's pack to weaken the rainwater's resolve. She hid the trap with the first, showing it to Lila, who frowned. "This is deliberate," Lila said, photographing the logo. "I'll trace it, but we need more proof to stop them." Ella nodded, her resolve hardening. She began patrolling the forest with Coda's pack in sight, their presence a quiet reassurance as she marked trap locations on a map Lila gave her. At home, Thomas noticed Ella's growing determination. "You're walking a hard path, little one," he said one evening, his hands steady as he braided her hair. "The valley's testing you, but you're not alone." He taught her a Salish prayer for strength, its words weaving into her dreams. Yet Jasper's shadow loomed larger. He sent a letter to Thomas, offering a fortune for the land and warning of consequences if refused. The threat, paired with town's growing hostility toward the dogs, pushed Ella to a breaking point. One dusk, as Coda and his pack drank from the river, Ella knelt beside him, her hand hovering near his golden fur. "We're in this together," she whispered, her voice fierce. Coda's eyes met hers, a silent vow. She was no longer just a girl on a homestead. She was a guardian, bound to the dogs and the river, ready to face whatever came next. The Willow Creek Valley was cloaked in the heavy stillness of early evening, the sky a bruise of purples and grays as storm clouds gathered over the jagged hills. Ella Rainwater stood at the edge of the homestead's riverbank, her small hands clutching the map she'd been marking with Dr. Lila Chen, each red X, a silent accusation of the traps threatening. Coda's pack, the golden Labrador retriever, had become more than an ally. His steady presence, often glimpsed at dusk with his pack, was a lifeline in a valley teetering on the edge of conflict. At 9, Ella was no longer just a guardian of the river. She was a warrior, her heart steeled by the weight of what she'd uncovered and the fight she knew was coming. The past week had been a crucible. Ella's patrols with Lila had revealed 3 more traps, all bearing Clear Cut Industries logo, hidden in the underbrush near the homestead's borders. Each discovery tightened the knot in her stomach, confirming Jasper Holt's hand in the campaign against the dogs. Lila had photographed the traps, her face grim as she sent the images to her university contacts, but she warned Ella, "We need hard evidence linking these to Clear Cut's orders. Without it, Jasper can claim they're old or misplaced." Ella had nodded, hiding her frustration, and tucked the latest trap under the cabin's floorboard with the others, a growing arsenal of proof she wasn't ready to reveal. Thomas, her grandfather, had watched her with quiet pride but growing concern. Over dinner, as the scent of roasted trout filled the cabin, he'd spoken of the Salish concept of squimial, the responsibility to protect the land for future generations. "You're carrying it now, Ella," he said, his silver ponytail catching the firelight. but it's heavy, and it asks for wisdom as much as courage." His words, meant to guide, only deepened Ella's resolve. She couldn't let Jasper win, not when the river, the dogs, and her family's legacy were at stake. The town was another battleground. Jasper's campaign had taken root, with posters in the general store calling for a wild dog removal. Vote at the upcoming council meeting. Ella overheard parents at school, their voices sharp with fear, blaming the pack for everything from tipped trash cans to ailing livestock. Her friend Sarah passed her a crumpled note. Jasper's saying the dogs attacked a calf. It's a lie, but people believe him. Ella's fists clenched. She knew the calf had died from drinking tainted water, not from Coda's pack, but truth was slipping through her fingers like river silt. Her approach to the inmost cave, the heart of the conflict, came at the town hall, a weathered building that once housed Salish gatherings but now echoed with division. Ella sat beside Thomas, her cedar bracelet a talisman against the room's tension. The air smelled of dust and coffee, and the crowd buzzed with anxious murmurs. Jasper stood at the front, his suit crisp, his voice honeyed as he addressed the council. "These dogs are a clear danger," he said, gesturing to a photo of a mangled fence. "They threaten our livelihoods, our safety. Clearcut's offering to fund a professional removal team, humane, efficient, and the rainwater land. Could support this effort if Thomas would see reason." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, but Ella's heart roared. She glanced at Thomas, who sat stone-faced, then at Sarah, who gave her a small nod. Before she could second-guess herself, Ella stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "Those dogs aren't dangerous," she said, her words clear despite the tremor in her hands. "I freed one from a trap on our land, Coda, their leader. He was hurt, not attacking. They drink from our river because it's clean, because Clearcut's made everything else poison." The room fell silent, eyes turning to the 9-year-old who spoke with the fire of her ancestors. Jasper's smile tightened, but he recovered. "Ella, you're brave, but you're young. Those animals are wild, unpredictable." A farmer shouted, "They tore up my coop." Ella shook her head. "They're hungry because the fish are gone, because the logging's killing the valley. And those traps, they've got your company's name on them, Mr. Holt." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thomas's hand found hers, squeezing gently, a silent, "Well done." Lila, seated in the back, scribbled furiously, her camera ready to document. For the moment. But Jasper's voice was smooth as ice. "Traps? Likely old equipment misplaced years ago. We're here to solve problems, not make them." He turned to the council. "Vote for the removal, protect our town." The vote was close, too close. Hands raised for the removal outnumbered those against, including Thomas's and Lila's. The motion passed, authorizing Clearcut to act on public land. Ella's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to cry. She'd spoken truth, planted seeds of doubt, but the dogs were still in danger, and Jasper's gaze lingered on her. A warning she felt like a chill. Outside, under a sky heavy with storm clouds, Lila pulled Ella aside. "You were incredible," she said, her eyes fierce. "We're not done. I'm digging into those traps. Someone at Clearcut knows something." Ella nodded, clutching the pouch of cedar and sage. Coda's pack was out there, and she was their voice. The council meeting had been her inmost cave, a test of courage that showed her the valley's fractures and her own strength. She was ready to fight, with allies like Lila and Thomas, and enemies like Jasper closing in. The air in Willow Creek Valley crackled with the threat of an approaching storm, dark clouds piling over the forested hills as thunder rumbled like a warning drum. Hella Rainwater stood on the homestead's porch, her small frame rigid with determination, the pouch of cedar and sage in her pocket, a talisman against the fear gnawing at her heart. The town council's vote to remove Coda's pack had set a dangerous machine in motion, and Jasper Holt's promise of humane action felt like a lie as bitter as the polluted streams beyond their river. At 9, Ella faced her greatest ordeal yet, a confrontation that would test her courage, her bond with the wild dogs, and the legacy of her Salish ancestors. The day had begun with a troubling sign. Thomas, usually spry despite his 70 years, woke with a deep rattling cough. His breath labored as he tended the morning fire. Ella watched him, her stomach twisting with worry. "It's just the damp air," he said, waving off her concern, but his ashen face told a different story. Dr. Lila Chen, who'd arrived to test the river's oxygen levels, took one look at Thomas and switched to scientist as healer. "This cough's not normal, Mr. Rainwater," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's consistent with respiratory issues I've seen in the valley, likely from clear-cuts, dust and chemical runoff in the air." Thomas shook his head, his silver ponytail swaying. "No hospitals. My place is here, with the land, with Ella." His stubbornness was a wall, but Ella saw the pain in his eyes, a mirror of her own fear. The mining wasn't just stealing the valley's water. It was stealing her grandfather's breath, inch by inch. She clutched the cedar bracelet her mother had given her, resolve hardening. She couldn't lose Thomas, not after losing her parents to the same fight. The tension broke at dusk when a low growl from the tree line announced Coda's pack. Ella stepped outside, her heart lifting as the golden Labrador retriever emerged. His wounded shoulder healing, but his eyes alert. The pack, thinner now, their ribs stark under matted fur, formed a protective arc around the homestead, their presence a silent vow. Ella knelt, offering Coda a piece of cornbread, her voice soft. "We're in trouble, aren't we?" Coda's steady gaze was her answer, a shared understanding that the valley's fate hung in the balance. The ordeal erupted with the roar of engines. 3 trucks screeched up the dirt drive, their headlights slicing through the gathering dark. Jasper Holt led the charge, flanked by 6 men in tactical gear, their tranquilizer rifles glinting ominously. A woman in a wildlife management uniform followed, her clipboard marked with official seals. Ella's blood ran cold. The removal team had come and they weren't waiting for permission. Thomas stepped onto the porch, his cough suppressed by sheer will, his voice a low thunder. "You're trespassing, Jasper. The council vote doesn't cover private land." Jasper's smile was thin, his eyes flicking to the dogs. "Sheriff's on his way, Thomas. We've got a state override. Public safety trumps property lines when wild animals threaten the community." He gestured. To Coda, who growled, hackles raised. "They're aggressive. We're here to fix that." Ella's fear ignited into fury. She darted forward, placing herself between Coda and the men, her voice ringing out. "They're not aggressive. You're the ones setting traps, hurting them to scare us." She pointed at Jasper, her small hand steady. "You want our river, and you'll do anything to get it." Coda moved to her side, his growl echoing through the pack, now fanning out like a living shield. Lila emerged from the cabin, camera in hand, her voice sharp. "I'm documenting this for the university and the environmental board. Those traps have Clear-Cut's logo." "Explain that, Mr. Holt." Jasper's jaw tightened, but the wildlife officer stepped forward, her tone clipped. "We're authorized to act regardless of local disputes. Stand aside or we'll involve law enforcement." The standoff teetered on a knife's edge. Thunder rolled closer now, and the first raindrops pattered on the cabin's roof. Thomas coughed, leaning on the porch railing, his eyes fierce despite his frailty. "This is Salish land," he said. "You'll not take its guardians while I breathe." Ella's heart pounded. She saw the rifles, the cages in the trucks, the greed in Jasper's eyes. This was the moment, the ordeal that would define her path. Then a new sound cut through the tension, a siren, faint but growing, louder. Sheriff Lena Tahoma, a Salish woman who'd known Tomas since childhood, pulled up in her cruiser, her face grim. "Jasper, you're out of bounds," she said, stepping out. "No override gives you rights on private land without a warrant." She turned to Ella, her eyes softening. "You okay, kid?" Ella nodded, her voice steady. "They're here for the dogs, Sheriff. But the dogs are protecting us, protecting the river." Coda pressed against her leg, his warmth a lifeline. The sheriff's gaze swept the scene. The armed men, the circling pack, Thomas's labored breathing. She faced Jasper. "Back off, Holt. We'll settle this legally, not with guns." Jasper's mask slipped, frustration flashing. "You're making a mistake, Lena. This valley needs Clear-Cut's jobs." But the sheriff's stance was unyielding, and the wildlife officer hesitated, sensing the shift. Rain fell harder now, soaking Ella's braid, but she stood tall, Coda at her side, the pack unwavering. Jasper climbed into his truck, his men following. their retreat a temporary victory in a war far from won. As the trucks vanished, Ella turned to Thomas, her eyes wide. "We stopped them, grandfather." Thomas managed a weak smile, but a cough racked him, and he sank onto the porch steps. Lila rushed to his side, her face pale. "He needs a doctor, Ella. Now." Ella's world tilted. The dogs were safe, but her grandfather was slipping, and the valley's fight was only beginning. The storm broke over Willow Creek Valley with a fury that matched the tension of the night before, rain lashing the Rainwater homestead and thunder shaking the ancient cedars. Ella Rainwater stood on the porch, her braid dripping, her heart a tumult of relief and dread. The confrontation with Jasper Holt and his removal team had been a victory. Coda and his pack were safe for now, thanks to Sheriff Lena Tahoma's intervention. But the cost was etched in Thomas's ashen face. Her grandfather's cough had worsened, each rasp a reminder of clear-cut industry's poison seeping into the valley's air. At 9, Ella clutched the cedar and sage pouch in her pocket, her resolve unbroken, but her fear for Thomas growing. Like the storm, Dr. Lila Chen knelt beside Thomas, who sat slumped on the porch steps, his silver ponytail dark with rain. "Mr. Rainwater, you need medical attention," Lila urged, her voice steady despite the urgency in her eyes. "This isn't just a cold, it's environmental exposure, likely from logging dust." Thomas shook his head, his hand gripping the railing. "The land needs me, Lila. Ella needs me." His stubbornness was a wall, but Ella saw the tremor in his fingers, the effort it took to breathe. Sheriff Lena, her cruiser still idling in the drive, stepped closer, her face a mix of duty and kinship. "Thomas, you're no good to anyone if you collapse. Let's get you to the clinic just for a check." Ella's throat tightened. She wanted to beg him to go, but the fear of losing him, even for a night, silenced her. Coda, the golden Labrador retriever, pressed against her leg, his wet fur warm, his brown eyes steady. The pack, scattered along the tree line, watched like sentinels, their presence a quiet strength. Ella's voice broke the deadlock. "Grandfather, please," she said, her small hand touching his. "The dogs and I will guard the river. You taught me how." Tomas's eyes met hers, pride flickering through his pain. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, little one, but you stay with Lila and Coda." Lila and Lena helped him to the cruiser, Ella following, her heart heavy but her purpose clear. As the sheriff drove off, Lila turned to Ella. "We're not done fighting, but you held the line tonight, that's something. The reward came not in triumph but in revelation." Lila, staying at the cabin to monitor the storm's impact on the river, pulled Ella inside, where the hearth fire cast a warm glow. "I traced one of the traps," Lila said, spreading photos on the table. "The serial numbers match equipment clear-cut ordered last year, not old stock as Jasper claimed." Someone high up approved this. Ella's eyes widened, the pieces clicking. "Jasper's trying to scare us off the land by hurting the dogs," she said. Lila nodded. "And I'm betting he's not acting alone. We need more to nail him. Documents. Witnesses." Ella's mind raced. The traps, the vote, Jasper's threats, they were all part of a plan to seize the river. But Coda's trust, Lila's science, and Thomas's teachings were her weapons. She felt a surge of purpose. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a guardian chosen by the valley and its wild kin. The storm outside raged, but inside a plan was forming. As night deepened, a low bark from Coda drew Ella to the window. The pack was restless, pacing the riverbank, their eyes glinting in the rain. "They're trying to tell us something," Ella said, pulling on her raincoat. Lila hesitated, then grabbed her flashlight. "Stay close," she said. They followed Coda through the downpour, the pack leading them up a muddy trail Ella had never explored. The rain stung her face, but Coda's golden form was a beacon, his limp barely slowing him as he navigated the slick terrain. The trail climbed to a ridge overlooking the valley, where the storm's chaos revealed a hidden truth. Coda stopped, at a rocky outcrop, his nose pointing to a pile of debris. Broken branches, plastic tarps, and buried beneath a rusted metal box. Lila pried it open, revealing soaked papers stamped with Clear-Cut's logo. Internal memos detailing illegal dumping of chemicals near the river's tributaries, dated months before the water turned bad. "This is it," Lila whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "Proof Jasper's been covering up pollution to justify seizing your land." Ella's heart soared. This was the reward, the evidence they needed to expose Clearcut. But the victory was bittersweet. A distant rumble, not thunder, shook the ground. A mudslide, triggered by the storm and Clearcut's deforested slopes, was churning down the valley, threatening the homestead. Coda barked, urgent, and turned back, the pack fanning out. "He's showing us a safe path," Ella said, certainty in her voice. Lila clutched the papers, nodding. "Let's move." Coda led them along a game trail, skirting the slide's path, his pack scouting ahead to warn of falling debris. Ella's sneakers slipped in the mud, but Coda paused, ensuring she kept pace. Lila followed, her flashlight cutting through the rain. The trail wound to higher ground, where the homestead's lights flickered below, still safe. As they caught their breath, Ella knelt beside Coda, her hand brushing his wet fur. "You knew," she whispered. "You always knew." The storm's roar faded, leaving a fragile quiet. Lila secured the papers in her waterproof bag, her eyes fierce. "This could change everything, Ella, but we need to get it to the right people, fast." Ella nodded, the weight of the evidence grounding her. She'd faced the ordeal, stood against Jasper's men, and now held proof that could save the valley. Coda's pack settled around them, their warmth a shield against the cold. Ella felt her mother's absence less keenly. She was part of something, bigger now, a circle of guardians, human and wild. Back at the cabin, Lila radioed Sheriff Lena, learning Tomas was stable but needed rest. Ella sat by the fire, Coda at her feet. The memos a promise of justice. The reward wasn't just the evidence, it was the bond she'd forged with Coda, the trust of the pack, and the strength she'd found in herself. The fight wasn't over, but Ella was ready, her heart full of the valley's wild song. The dawn broke over Willow Creek Valley with a fragile clarity, the storm's fury leaving behind a world washed clean, but scarred. Mudslides had carved gashes in the hills, and the river, though still pure at the Rainwater homestead, churned with silt downstream. Ella Rainwater stood in the cabin's doorway, her braid damp from the night's ordeal, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Coda and his pack had vanished after leading her and Dr. Lila Chen to safety. The rusted metal box of Clearcut Industries' incriminating memos, now tucked in Lila's waterproof bag, was a hard-won prize, proof of Jasper Holt's lies and the company's pollution. At 9, Ella felt the weight of victory, but also the urgency of the road back, to protect the evidence, save the dogs, and ensure her grandfather Thomas's health. Inside, the cabin was a haven of warmth, the hearth fire crackling as Lila sorted the soggy papers, her face alight with determination. "These memos are dynamite," she said, spreading them on the table. "Orders to dump chemicals, falsified water tests, even a plan to pressure landowners like Thomas. If we get this to the federal EPA, Clearcut's done." Ella nodded, clutching the cedar and sage pouch Thomas had given her, its earthy scent grounding her. The evidence was their weapon, but delivering it meant navigating a valley divided by fear and Jasper's influence. Ella's heart ached for Thomas, still at the clinic with Sheriff Lena Tahoma. Lila had called for an update. Thomas's cough was responding to treatment, but his lungs bore the scars of years breathing Clearcut's tainted air. "He'll be okay," Lila assured, seeing Ella's worry. "But we need to act fast. Jasper won't sit idle after last night." Ella thought of Coda, his golden fur and steady gaze and the pack's trust. They'd saved her from the mudslide. Now she had to save them from Jasper's traps and the town's cull. The road back began with a plan. Lila would drive to the university to secure the memos with her research team, bypassing local authorities who might be swayed by Clearcut's money. Ella, too young to go, would stay at the homestead, guarding the river and watching for Coda's pack. "You're the heart of this, Ella," Lila said, her eyes fierce. "Keep the dogs safe. I'll be back with help." Ella nodded, her small hands steady despite the fear fluttering in her chest. She was a guardian now, bound to the valley's wild pulse. As Lila prepared to leave, a low bark echoed from the tree line. Ella rushed to the porch, her heart lifting as Coda emerged, his pack trailing like shadows. He limped slightly, his shoulder healing, but his brown eyes were bright, fixed on her. Ella knelt, offering a piece of jerky, her voice soft. "You're back," she said. "We've got work to do." Coda huffed, a sound of agreement, and the pack settled around the river, their presence a vow to stand with her. The plan hit a snag when Sheriff Lena radioed with news. Jasper was rallying the town, claiming the mudslide proved the dogs were a danger, stirring panic to justify an immediate cull. "He's pushing the council to expand the removal to private land," Lena warned. "I'm stalling, but you've got maybe a day." Ella's stomach dropped. Time was slipping away, and Jasper's lies were tightening the noose around Coda's pack. Lila's departure was cut short by a new arrival. A battered jeep pulled up, and out stepped Sarah, Ella's school friend, her face pale but determined. "I heard about last night," Sarah said, clutching a notebook. "My dad works for Clearcut. He says Jasper's got a meeting today to plan something big. I wrote down what I heard." She handed Ella the notebook, pages scrawled with names and times. Ella hugged her, a spark of hope igniting. Sarah was an ally, her courage a small but vital light in the gathering dark. Lila scanned the notes, her jaw tightening. "Jasper's meeting with Clearcut executives this afternoon, likely to cover his tracks. If we can get someone there to record it, we could link him to the memos." Ella's mind raced. "I can't go, but Coda can lead us to the ridge above. Their office, we could hide, listen." Lila hesitated, then nodded. "It's risky, but it could work. Sarah, you in?" Sarah swallowed hard, but agreed, her loyalty to Ella stronger than her fear. The trio set out, Coda and his pack guiding them through the forest to a vantage point overlooking Clearcut's valley office. The dogs moved like ghosts, avoiding trails, where Jasper's men might patrol. From the ridge, Ella peered through binoculars Lila lent her, spotting Jasper with suited men, their voices faint but heated. Sarah, trembling, held Lila's recorder, capturing fragments of talk about eliminating obstacles and securing the aquifer. Ella's heart pounded. This was the proof they needed, but a rustle below warned of a guard approaching. Coda growled, low and warning, and the pack fanned out, distracting the guard long enough for Ella, Lila, and Sarah to slip away. Back at the homestead, Lila played the recording, her face grim. "It's not enough to convict, but it ties Jasper to the traps and the land grab. Combined with the memos, it's a start." Ella looked at Coda, now curled by the fire, and felt a surge of gratitude. The dogs had risked their safety for her, just as she risked hers for them. The road back was fraught. Jasper's meeting meant he'd act soon, and Thomas's health hung in the balance. But Ella had the memos, Sarah's notes, and the recording, each a step toward justice. Coda's pack, her silent army, gave her strength. Their bond a reward greater than any evidence. She was ready to face the final battles, to protect the river and the wild hearts that called it home. The Willow Creek Valley shimmered under a tentative sun, the storm's aftermath leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. Ella Rainwater stood at the homestead's riverbank, her braid loose and tangled from sleepless nights, her 9-year-old heart a crucible of hope and fear. The rusted box of Clearcut Industries memos, Sarah's scribbled notes, and Lila's covert recording were locked in a safe at Dr. Lila Chen's university lab, a ticking bomb of evidence that could expose Jasper Holt's crimes. But time was a predator, stalking Coda's pack and the river they guarded. Sheriff Lena Tahoma's warning echoed in Ella's mind. Jasper was pushing for an emergency cull, and the valley's fractured community was teetering toward his lies. Thomas, still frail at the clinic, was stable but far from the fight, leaving Ella to carry the Salish legacy alone, yet not alone, with Coda's golden fur and soulful eyes beside her. The morning brought chaos. Search teams combed the valley, drawn by the mudslide's destruction and rumors of the dog's role in the homestead standoff. News vans from the city parked near the general store, their cameras hungry for a story of wild beasts versus rural heroes. Ella, Lila, and Sarah huddled in the cabin, the hearthfire a faint comfort against the clamor outside. Lila's phone buzzed with updates from her university team. The memos had been verified, linking Clearcut to illegal dumping, but Jasper's influence had local officials dragging their feet. "We need public pressure," Lila said, her eyes fierce. "If the town sees the truth, Jasper's done." Ella clutched the cedar and sage pouch, her grandfather's words squimiala, the duty to protect the land, burning in her chest. Coda, curled by the door, lifted his head, sensing her resolve. The pack, scattered in the forest to avoid the search teams, had left tracks that worried Ella. "They're being hunted," she whispered, her voice cracking. Sarah, clutching her notebook, nodded. "My dad said Jasper's hired private trackers. They're not waiting for the council." The weight of it crushed Ella. Her evidence was safe, but Coda's pack was exposed, and the river's fate hung. On her next move, Lila devised a plan. A public stand at the town hall where media and townsfolk would gather for an emergency meeting Jasper had called to address the crisis. Ella would speak, using the evidence to shift the narrative while Lila presented her scientific findings. Sarah would slip the recording to a trusted reporter, amplifying their case. But the risk was immense. Jasper's men were watching, and the town's fear of the dogs ran deep. Ella's stomach churned, but Coda's steady gaze anchored her. "We'll do it for the valley," she said, her small hand brushing his fur. "For you." The town hall was a pressure cooker, the air thick with sweat and tension. Over 100 people packed the pews, farmers, loggers, parents, and reporters, their murmurs a storm of doubt and anger. Jasper stood at the podium, his suit pristine, his voice smooth as he spun a tale of danger. "These dogs caused the slide, endangered lives. Clearcut's offering to fund their removal and rebuild the valley, starting with the rainwater land, which could serve us all." He gestured to a screen showing blurred images of paw prints near mudslide debris, a lie so blatant Ella's fists clenched. Lila squeezed her hand, whispering, "Your turn." Ella stood, her sneakers squeaking on the wooden floor, her cedar bracelet glinting under the lights. The room hushed, eyes turning to the 9-year-old who dared to face a corporate giant. "My name's Ella Rainwater," she began, her voice clear despite the tremor in her knees. "The dogs didn't cause the slide. Clearcut did, by cutting. The hill's bare. Coda, their leader, saved us last night. He led us to safety to proof that Jasper's company's been poisoning our water." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ella held up a photo Lila had printed, a trap with Clearcut's logo, its jaws stained with Coda's blood. "They're hurting the dogs to scare us, to take our river. But the dogs are guardians, like my grandfather taught me. They drink from our spring because it's clean, because they trust us." Her voice broke, but she pushed on. "I found Coda caught in one of these traps. I freed him, and he brought his pack to protect us. They're not our enemies. They're our family." Lila stepped forward, projecting charts of polluted water samples and the memo's text. "These documents, found by Ella's courage, prove Clearcut's illegal dumping. The aquifer on the rainwater land is the valley's last clean water source. Jasper's plan is to seize it for profit, not progress." Sarah, in the back, slipped the recording to a reporter, who began typing furiously, live streaming the meeting to thousands online. Jasper's mask cracked, his voice sharp. "This is nonsense from a child and an outsider. The dogs are a threat and the rainwaters are holding back our future." But the crowd shifted. Farmers who'd drunk from the spring, parents who'd heard Ella's story at school whispered, "Doubts." Sheriff Lena, standing by the door, nodded to Ella, her presence a shield. Then a commotion outside. Ella's heart leapt as barks echoed, sharp and urgent. She ran to the window, the crowd following, and saw Coda's pack on the town hall lawn. Their fur soaked, but their eyes fierce. They formed a circle, not attacking but standing, as if claiming their place. Coda limped forward, his gaze locked. On Ella through the glass. Reporters' cameras flashed, capturing the moment. A pack defending a girl, a valley defending itself. The tide turned. A farmer stood, his voice rough. "My well's bad because of Clearcut, not the dogs." "Ella's right," a mother joined him. "My kids drink from that spring. We need it." The reporter's stream went viral, hashtags like Darks Save Willow Creek trending. Jasper's allies faltered, their arguments drowned by the crowd's rising voices. Ella faced Jasper, her small frame radiant with courage. You can't take the river. You can't take the dogs. They're part of us. Coda barked, a single resonant sound, and the pack echoed, a chorus that shook the hall. Jasper's face paled, his retreat inevitable. He stormed out, muttering, "About lawyers," but the valley had spoken. Lila hugged Ella, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Ella. The world's watching now." Sarah grinned, her notebook clutched like a trophy. Sheriff Lena approached, her smile proud. "Thomas'll be proud, kid. You're Salish through and through." Ella knelt by the window, pressing her hand to the glass where Coda stood. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart full. The resurrection was complete. She'd faced the valley's darkest moment, turned fear into unity, and reclaimed the dog's place as guardians. The evidence was public, Jasper's power broken, and the river's song was louder than ever. 6 months after the town hall showdown, Willow Creek Valley bloomed with renewed life, its hills greener where replanting had begun, its river sparkling. Under a late summer sun, the Rainwater homestead stood proud, its cedar cabin aglow with morning light, the air sweet with sage and wildflowers. Ella Rainwater, now 10, knelt by the riverbank, her braid adorned with a new cedar bead, a gift from her grandfather, Thomas, for her birthday. The valley had changed, healed by the elixir of truth and unity she'd helped unleash, and Ella, once a quiet girl, was now a beacon of hope. Her bond with Coda and his pack, a story whispered across the Pacific Northwest. The aftermath of that pivotal night had been swift and transformative. The viral livestream of Ella's speech, coupled with Lila's evidence and Sarah's recording, had sparked a federal investigation into clear-cut industries. The memos, detailing illegal dumping and land-grabbing schemes, led to charges against Jasper Holt and his executives. Jasper, stripped of his influence, left the valley, his tailored suits replaced by the weight of accountability. Clearcut, under public pressure, funded a massive remediation effort, cleaning the tainted streams, replanting deforested slopes, and creating sustainable jobs guided by Salish elders and environmental scientists like Lila. Thomas, recovered but slower now, stood beside Ella, his silver ponytail glinting as he tossed a handful of karma seeds into the garden. His cough had eased with cleaner air, and his pride in Ella shone brighter than the river. "You brought the valley back, little one," he said, his voice warm. "You and those dogs." Ella smiled, her cedar bracelet catching the light, a reminder of her mother's legacy and her own strength. Coda and his pack were no longer strays but guardians, their presence woven into the valley's rhythm. The town, once divided, had embraced them, with families leaving offerings of food near the river as thanks. Coda, his shoulder fully healed, led his pack on nightly patrols, their golden grey and black forms a quiet promise of protection. Ella had built a small shelter by the homestead for them, not to tame but to honor, its roof woven with willow branches in the Salish way. Lila, now a permanent ally, had secured grants to monitor the river's aquifer, declaring it a protected heritage site. She taught Ella and other children about water science, blending Salish wisdom with lab techniques. Sarah, bolder now, joined them, her notebook filled with plans for a Valley Youth Council. Sheriff Lena Tahoma, a steadfast supporter, ensured the dog's safety, her cruiser a familiar sight near the homestead. The elixir wasn't just the clean river or the defeated company. It was the community's heart, mended by Ella's courage and Coda's trust. At a valley festival, Ella stood before a crowd, no longer trembling, and shared the Salish story of animals as kin. "Coda showed me we're stronger together," she said, her voice clear as the river. Children cheered, tossing cedar petals, while Coda barked, his pack echoing from the hills. As dusk fell, Ella sat by the river, Coda at her side, his warmth a steady comfort. The valley sang, crickets, water, wind, a song of resilience. She whispered a prayer Thomas taught her, thanking the land and its guardians. The homestead, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary, its river a gift for generations. Ella's small act of freeing Coda had rippled outward, proving compassion could heal a valley and unite a people. She was home, and the wild was with her.